let's get started here. Thank you all who stayed, and you can get cookies. You'll have to sneak out and get those at some point. So as you can see, I am not Jen Stave from D-Cubed at HBS. Jen got called away to an appointment. I work with Jen. I'm the head of finance and administration at D-Cubed over at the business school. And I just want to start by thanking HDSI for today. I mean, we've heard from such a diverse perspectives, from the humanities to social sciences into the natural sciences, et cetera. So just a quick round of applause for HDSI. I have to admit, there's a group of us here from across the river, as we like to say, and we're a little bit jealous because at the business school we have to stick a little bit to the business core. So it's really nice to see the breadth of the university here. You know, the research we do at D-Cubed is often with the Fortune 500 companies, the bigger businesses that are transforming to the AI world. They're struggling sometimes with knowing what to do, what comes next. But they also have, obviously, a lot of legacy stuff in place. Their data structures, the infrastructure they have, the teams, the way the organizations are structured, where ideas come from. So this turns out to be like a really good example of going even further in the diversity of what the university thinks about, because you know, we get to talk about blank slate here, where organizations are thinking from scratch the way to approach this new world. So I think this is going to be an exciting talk. And Jackson, why don't you take it over from here?
Absolutely. I'm Jackson, partner at Archerman Capital, and I'm thrilled to introduce three of the leading private AI market investors, starting from the left to right. Emma Norchet is a partner at T. Rowe Price, one of the largest investment management firms in the world, where she covers the firm's private, late-stage, and growth equity strategy within everything from AI, software and security, to space and deep tech. At T. Rowe, Emma is invested in AI companies such as OpenAI, Anthropic, Databricks, xAI, and many other transformational AI businesses. Next, Lucas Swisher is leading the private growth investing at Coatue Management, one of the largest technology-focused private and public investment funds focusing on AI, software, and security. At Coatue, Lucas has backed some of the most influential and largest AI companies: OpenAI, Databricks, Glean, Harvey, could go on. I'll stop there. And finally, Tomasz Tunguz is the founder and general partner at Theory Ventures, an early-stage VC focused on data, AI, ML, and infrastructure. He was formerly a managing director at Redpoint Ventures, started his career at Google. He's also well known for his blog, tomtunguz.com, where he writes about the evolving landscape of AI, startups, and venture capital, along with his book, Winning with Data. So welcome. Really thrilled to talk to you guys today. You spend every day talking to brand new AI businesses, customers purchasing AI, and just to set the table, it'd be an understatement to say that AI has changed the venture capital industry. Roughly 2/3 of investment in 2025 has been directed towards AI businesses, and a vast majority in the public market has been accounted to by AI. We're also seeing the pace of new revenue growth from brand new companies setting records at 10 million, 100 million, even $1 billion of revenue. And the pace of new AI innovations is truly breathtaking. That being said, given the overwhelming optimism around AI, for the past month, the conversation in AI investing seems to be, are we in a bubble? And we've talked about this in some of the panels earlier today. Some of that comes from the projected trillions of dollars of investment needed in the infrastructure to power AI over the next decade. Some of that comes from the overwhelming tilt towards AI investing, which has created a massively competitive market in the private markets. And then on the demand side, this weekend, very influential figure, Andrej Karpathy, talked about how this is not the year of agents, this is the decade of agents, and that we're just not quite there on full autonomy across the board. A few months ago, there was an MIT report that talked about how claiming 95% of enterprise AI pilots were failing. So let's start there. Do you believe with the assessment that this AI market is a bubble, a little overheated in certain areas, or is that theme underappreciating what you're seeing with all the AI companies you're talking to? Let's start with Tom.
I mean, there's a lot of reason to be excited about, right? So AI is one of the first technology waves that meaningfully increase U.S. GDP. This year alone, with about $500 billion in spend, we're adding more than 1% to US GDP. If you compare that to the mobile phone or the personal computer, they weren't even close. They were off by at least of a factor of 100. And so that's incredibly exciting. In addition, over the last 20 years, the US software venture capital industry, the companies that we've backed have generated about $1.5 trillion in value. That has focused on 3 to 5% of the revenue spend of most companies. The AI wave promises to go after the 30 to 70% of labor spend. And so there's the potential to create 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 times as much value going after labor. On the bear side, there are a lot of reasons to worry about excessive valuation, but the revenue growth rates here are incredible. Just to touch on a couple of the points for overvaluation, I think particularly in the data center ecosystem, you look at NVIDIA's PE ratio over the last 20 years. You've seen 2 consecutive spikes, first for video gaming and then for crypto. Both have seen significant crashes. The second is the use of off-balance sheet debt, which has exploded here in the last year, particularly with SPVs to finance different data centers. And then the last point I'll make is a lot of these GPU companies or people building data centers have extended the depreciation schedules. They've doubled them from about 3 years to 6 years, allowing them to borrow significantly more, and I think that poses a pretty significant risk.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think I would point out just a couple of other different things. I think on the pro side, though, we're not in a bubble side. If you just look at OpenAI's growth, for example, right, and you compare it to the tech giants of the last generation, the penetration curve on the consumer side of some of these technologies, in particular companies like OpenAI, has been incredible, right? You think about decades being compressed into literally like 2.25 years, right? So you think about that, and then you couple that with this could be much bigger this time than either Internet 1.0 or the SaaS wave, which felt a little bit more transition-y versus really like fundamental change. Here I'd use like one example, right? Take a company like Harvey AI. This is an AI legal company. They're not just going after 2 or 3% of IT spend within legal departments in large organizations. They have a chance to actually like fundamentally replace a lot of the work that lawyers do on a day-to-day basis. So the speed of what's happening and the outcomes of what's happening are much, much larger. I do totally agree with the CapEx build-out piece. That is one piece that I think a lot of people are studying in both the public and private markets right now, and there's a lot of consternation. The only thing I'd say is that's happened every 3 months for the last like 3 years. And every time, these companies have just beat expectations. They beat expectations on the penetration curves. What we can see, I think the thing it's gonna come down to ultimately is timing. Can these technologies get in the hands of people fast enough that there are real use cases and real ROI at the end of the day? You've seen it in the consumer. You start to see it in coding, right? You have great companies like Cursor and Anthropic inside of ChatGPT as well. And other industries like customer support, et cetera, right? You're starting to see these use cases, but I think the question is, can you do it fast enough that investment and all that infra build out makes sense?
I think what I'll say is we are, of course, long-term believer in this new wave of AI. But I think if you're talking a little bit about overheated and valuation rising, I think we are starting to see it fairly closely. I think especially as we are looking into a lot of the AI apps that we are starting to see, I think there's a lot of competition. There's many of them that are targeting very similar value proposition. I know we are seeing revenue ramp like we've never seen before. I think we used to think that a company was, on a spat to growth stage when they were hitting 50 million of ARR. I think now it doesn't take long for them to get there, and we're now seeing AI apps reaching 1 billion of ARR. I think the way we are thinking about this is durability. I think we believe there's opportunity across the spectrum in AI today, but the question we come back to before paying for a company is the growth durable here, and is there a true moat? And I think one of the things that we've been doing as the growth stage investors is really approaching it from more of like a barbell investment approach, where we've tend to invest and concentrate a lot more capital today into the later stages, where I still think that when we're looking into those companies from a revenue multiple, it's still quite compelling. And I think the one thing we are on the lookout for is the kind of first wave of consolidation across this whole new landscape. And we believe that we will see a lot more acquisition, and we will see a lot more of the foundational model company expanding their footprint and maybe going up to the application layer. And we would like to wait, I think, to see a little bit more how those dynamics are playing out before jumping in and backing a lot of the new emerging companies that we've seen.
Awesome.
Yeah, just shifting a little bit, these technologies don't exist in a vacuum. And it's interesting, you bring up mobile phones, you bring up the internet, and these did sort of blend into the consumer world, then in the business world. But this in particular has a lot of governments involved. And when governments and international actors get involved, there tends to be a lot of pressure on companies, large companies, startups, but then especially technology that gets into security. Security is a big part of AI. Can you talk a little bit about how companies are navigating sort of being vertically integrated, where they're really building the things that they need all built in that they know they can control, versus buying pieces off the shelf from around the world? We can't ignore China here. Huge investments, lots of technology coming out of there, and companies that use those to go fast, but then are either less sure of the security, but then also governments control, especially in the US, on what components can be inside these components. I wonder, Emma, can you talk first about how companies, startups are navigating this vertically integrated versus aggregating pieces across the ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that is making everyone nervous across the AI ecosystem has been kind of the decoupling that we've clearly seen over the last couple of years. And I think that makes a lot of company a little bit more nervous about partnering up or looking out for technologies that are emerging out of countries like China. I think for us as investors, I think as we are looking into new spaces, not only in AI, but for example, in robotics, it is obviously clear that China is ahead, especially in the field of robotics. But we still have the belief that the decoupling will continue for some period of time. And that, I think, gives the opportunity to a lot of companies here in the US to really have an advantage and to be able to be very compelling vendors for some of our companies here that have security concerns, just like what you were sharing.
Either of you agree? Extra points if you disagree.
I totally agree. I was going to say something almost completely different, which is I think you were hinting a little bit about this open versus closed dynamic and the proprietary models versus the open source models. And I think one of the top three issues, right, I don't know, 1, 2, or 3 is trust, right? If I'm Procter & Gamble, how do I know what I can trust? Can I trust DeepSeek? Came out of a Chinese lab. Can I trust something that came from, even Europe? I don't know. And so this is really, I think, inning 1, 2, or 3, maybe we're in inning 2, 2.5, 2 of this has been advantage proprietary models, right? That's what we see. Almost all the adoption and basically all of the revenue has been driven to the proprietary models, predominantly OpenAI and Anthropic in the US.
As those models, though, emerge from other countries like China, are you going to see the same adoption? Or
I mean, we haven't seen, people talk a lot about, using open source for this and that. We don't see it a lot, frankly, right? I think every time there's a new open source model that's released, you see a big spike and then a big decline, right? If you think about the DeepSeek moment 6 months ago, this was one of the moments that freaked the US markets out, actually, right? You have CapEx overbuild freakouts, and then you have DeepSeek moment freakouts, and every time people are like, oh my gosh, is there value in the language model layer? I think what we've seen is, at least in these first couple innings, the trust factor has really mattered for these large, especially for, well, 1, for consumers, but then 2, really for large enterprises today.
This sounds like an opportunity for someone out here if you're following.
We are starting to see at the early stage the use of open source models, particularly small language models. You have the very large ones, which we would characterize as models that say 200 billion parameters or more. But within lots of different companies where cost optimization is really important. I'll give you an example. So if the second generation of customer support answering companies, when you call and ask, or you talk to a Taco Bell, or you call Verizon and you ask them, to reset your password, they're calling on average about 25 different agents. And each of those agents is very expensive to run. And each of those agents has a very particular purpose. To use a multi-100 billion parameter model for that is overkill. And so what we're starting to see, particularly for cost reduction in industries where, as you were mentioning, there will be massive commoditization, is the use of fine-tuned open source small language models. And that's where we see things like QN, or we'll see a bunch of the, first time ever I did a diligence call and I heard about Meta Scout being used in one of these applications. So it's rare, but particularly as price pressures start to come in, we'll see much more adoption of open source.
Yeah, and some of the people earlier spoke about this, the need to sort of right-size the models or the tools to the task at hand. In a few minutes, we're going to go to questions from you, so everyone start thinking of their questions. But Jackson, you want to?
Yeah, no, I'd love to just jump into use cases. You're talking to founders every day, and investing at the cutting edge. By the time that the world is seeing some of these things, it's been in deployment or in development for a long period of time. What are the use cases that, one, you're seeing a lot of traction in, so things that are working. Two, use cases that you are really interested in investing in, and then three, use cases that you are just, wow, this is amazing. It's still a little early, so we're not necessarily deploying capital there, but just fascinating use cases that you're really excited about.
I'm happy to start. The most obvious one, the most obvious one today is the consumer using this for information retrieval, right, at the end of the day. But then I think if you talk about, there's this almost cascading list of use cases that are starting in different parts of their penetration curve. And the number one use case in enterprise is coding, right? It's without a doubt the most interesting and most deployed use case. We just led a round about a month ago into a company called Cursor, which probably a lot of folks in the audience use if you're a researcher or a developer. And it is the interface where a lot of developers interact with AI, and a lot of them for the first time, which is really, really exciting. And it's, again, one of these areas where you're seeing the revenue ramps just absolutely skyrocket, things that we've never seen before, right? And you can see that really inside of Anthropic and Cursor. And then I would say you go down the list of use cases, and it's like, okay, then there's customer support next. Then there's legal. Then there are some really interesting healthcare research use cases that we're seeing with companies like Open Evidence, which are used by almost half of doctors in the US every month now, right? The penetration curve of these things has happened really fast. I think the thing that I'm most excited about, but I feel like has not had its ChatGPT moment yet, is AI in the physical world. This is something that we're looking at all the time. It's the thing that we're most excited about, is when this really starts interacting with the physical world. Just the magnitude of what you can do becomes so much larger. But it still feels like we're years and years away, and I feel like we've been saying that for a decade in the venture community. 2 decades? Yeah.
I can go next. I think I would agree with most of these use cases, but I think what we are seeing being widely deployed today is more of the boring use cases. So for example, for us at Tiro, we have about 8,000 employees, and we're still widely using AI today for summarizing content. I think with AI, what we're seeing is a lot more content's getting created. We no longer have the time to read everything, to consume everything. And that really makes a huge difference, I think, just in terms of primary use case. I think I would agree on some of the other ones. We often see software development, coding, customer supports are some of the biggest ones that we've seen. And I think in terms of what the future has in store for us, I guess one of the points we've started to think a little bit more about is when we started to see this first kind of wave of AI, we started to say, well, what's the differentiation, or which company are going to survive? And there was a lot of question around, is UX, UI the ones that are going to be very successful? But as you start to think about this world of agents, ultimately, does UX, UI really matter if ultimately the future that you start to see is an agent-to-agent communication world? So then the users of these future tools become agent that probably do not care as much. So I think this is quite interesting. And I would agree that we are also very curious to see what's going to happen in the world of physical AI. And we think that at least XAI, where we have an investment, could be in an interesting position, just given the ecosystem that is quite broader with Tesla.
the technology called reinforcement learning. And so imagine you're a Roomba and you enter a room that's really dirty. You need to make a plan. How am I going to clean this room? How do I clean under the table? How do I clean the corners? What's going on with the rug? And first, you need to make a plan. And then if you're an AI system, you need to create what's called a reward function. So for every square foot of dirty floor I clean, I give myself 10 points. And if I fill the bin, I give myself 100 points. And if I clean everything, maybe I give myself another bonus. Those are the two parts of reinforcement learning today. And the first part, AI can do. If you use Claude Code or any of these tools, you will see that it can plan very effectively. The second part, the creation of the reward function, that's art. And there's a huge difference between one person and another. And right now, there's a lot of science. In fact, there was a paper published from Harvard yesterday talking about real advances in reinforcement learning. And the part that Karpathy talked about over the weekend on the Dwarkesh podcast is, well, we really need these systems to be able to self-orchestrate and create these reward functions, because in order to do any kind of sophisticated work with an enterprise, well, what do you do at work? You create a plan for yourself, and then if you crush that project, well, you're on vacation to Tahiti, right? And so what is the equivalent for a robot, and how do we make that possible? That's where we're spending a lot of time.
I was wondering, you've both spoken a lot about the LLM layer. Obviously, Tom, you're an early stage investor. How do you navigate what's going on with competitively versus cooperatively with the LLM layer? OpenAI had a dev day recently and announced several different initiatives, including Agent Kit, an area building autonomous agents from deployment to from creating an idea phase to actually deploying that agent. A lot of people are concerned about the early stage companies that have been working to build in this space, and companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, they've been very aggressive in expanding into the application layer. So would love all three of your opinions. Tom, first, as an early stage investor, how much do you think about that, and where are you confident that value will accrue throughout the stack?
Yeah, I remember when I was at Google, I was there a little bit after Arvin, and I remember this phase in the company's life where the business was growing really fast, and there was an opportunity to expand in almost any area because the technology was so well regarded, and the company was growing incredibly fast, and everybody was excited to be associated with it. And I remember us trampling on startups all the time. So there is no doubt in my mind this will happen. The growth rates that we've talked about and the market sizes and the enthusiasm is real and significant. And then if you just look at the OpenAI jobs postings or the Cognition jobs posting, you can get a sense of like, okay, OpenAI is pushing legal. There was a leaked video last summer about OpenAI releasing a customer support agent at a meetup in Tokyo. And so you can kind of see bits and pieces of it. The way that we think about investing is we want to go after the markets that are still measured in the tens of billions, but will not be the first order, because we do not want to face competition from these incumbents. There are enough questions already with the fundraising and the environment. And so we want to go after deep within the enterprise. So I'll give you an example. In every large enterprise, they have about 75 different security systems. All of those security systems produce alerts. 8,000 are produced per day. Less than 1% are reviewed by humans. Now, the US government is starting to regulate that 100% actually need to be reviewed by humans. And so we've invested in the category leader that build robots to read outputs from firewalls and network switches to understand what's going on. And that's a category that is measured in the hundreds of billions, 350 billion in labor spend, but will never be a top priority for Anthropic or Cognition or others.
I think we're pretty bullish on the application ecosystem, actually. I think if you were to rewind 2 years ago, everyone, at least in the public markets, and I think a lot of people in the private markets too, were saying, oh, well, this is just a technology that everyone's just going to bolt on, and all the incumbents are going to capture all the value, and no value is going to be captured in the private markets. I remember this being repeated over and over again. And you fast forward 2.5 years later, post ChatGPT, and all of a sudden, almost all the value, at least from a usage perspective, is being captured in the private markets, right? I think ServiceNow has the most quote-unquote AI revenue of an application company in the public markets, and it's maybe 100 million of ARR versus billions and billions that's value generated in the private markets. And I just say that to say, like, people always think the incumbents have so much power. I remember early in my investing career, people would always be like, well, can't Amazon do it, and can't Google do it, and can't Meta do it, and can't this, can't that. And the reality is there's always room for these next generation companies to run. And I think now I'm more optimistic than I have been for years, primarily because the thing that seems to matter the most is, of course, you could talk about moats and data access and all these things are very important, but it's speed, focus and speed, right? And there's been a rise of this culture in San Francisco over the last year and a half of like the 996 culture, which is you're working, basically it means you work constantly. You're working around the clock. And it's really true. And I think it's kudos to a lot of these companies that have emerged from this first wave, the Sierra, the Harvey, the Decagon, the Mercor, right, the Cursor, all these companies, they all do this. They're all in the office all the time. They're cranking constantly, and it has created this culture of like incredible performance and growth. And to the point where, I'll just give you one example. I was trying to meet one of these companies that I just mentioned, and the only time the founder would give me is 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday. I've never seen that before in my investing career, where the only time I could get a slot on somebody's calendar was 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday. I mean, it's crazy, right? But this is pretty regular now, where half of my meetings are on Saturdays and Sundays because they're in the office working 5 days, 5 days a week during the week, and maybe I'll take a breakfast on a Saturday morning. So I say all these things to say I'm really bullish on the app ecosystem because of this dynamic.
And then what I'll say is, for us, we've obviously concentrated money on the foundational layers company. I think maybe to Thomas' point a little bit earlier, I think we've been a little bit more skeptical of some of the space like vibe coding, for example, where we've seen a lot of different player and we haven't really seen yet whether or not there's potential consolidation. I think we would be a lot more eager to go towards very specific use cases rather than what we believe could be near term and where we think some of these companies could have a meaningful advantage. I think in terms of the general take that we've also taken is a lot of our company we have in the portfolio also have size and are quite scalable. And we've encouraged a lot of partnership with the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic. We are a large shareholder in Canva, for example. And I think you've probably seen, if you were following OpenAI Dev Day, with native integration. And we think that this can be quite meaningful for all of them. So we hope to see a lot more partnering between some of the companies that are building something interesting around the ecosystem and then leveraging the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic as a distribution channel.
Yeah, how about I do one more rapid fire and then we'll go to the audience. So in keeping with the theme of this in terms of speaking broadly about AI in the world and all of the places it impacts, there's a lot of talk whether this technology will make us a shining society or destroy us. And it's a really interesting question. I wanted you guys to just sort of back out of sort of the ROI and the revenue growth and the cleanest carpets in the world or whatever it is we can accomplish. And just for a second, what is the future you see? Just a real quick down the line, is this something that really goes into a tailspin, really lifts us off the ground, is something in the middle, and just a tiny bit of evidence? What have you seen that is going to sort of back up your assertion of where we're going to end up?
So I brought two of my boys here, and I told them in the car, we were driving in the car was driving itself, we were talking to an AI, and they were asking me a question about how many rockets are launched each day in the US. And we researched it, and we knew the answer, and then we started talking about personalized medicine and incredible longevity. And I tell them almost every week now, I am so jealous that you get to outlive me because of the massive advances that this technology will bring. So I'm hugely, hugely bullish.
Hugely bullish. Next.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we're technology investors, so if we're not bullish, we should pack it up and do something else probably. But no, I would agree. I think what I would point to is if you look at just the U.S. economy over the last 12 months, it's very clear that AI has been buoying the whole economy in many ways. Over half of GDP growth in the first half of the year was AI infrastructure build out. Without that, we'd be in serious trouble. And I think if you just look at history over the last couple hundred years, I think technology has been an incredible force for good. It's been an incredible force for productivity. It's lifted large swaths of the population around the world out of poverty in many ways. And so I'm a huge believer in it. And I think if you look at the near term and you think about GDP growth and what we want to do as a country, and if you look at the mid and long term productivity growth, which is a driver of wealth for the world, Like we need something. This is the wave of today.
Yeah, we were talking about this last night together, but I think we don't have in the US enough skilled labor. So ultimately, something needs to happen. And I think the technology that we're developing today will allow us, I think, for the very first time to think about it as, you know, having enough workforce to achieve whatever we want to bring to reality. So I think long-term bullish. However, I do think that we need to continue to, of course, be careful as we're continuing to develop and play with this technology. I think there was an article this morning that I thought was pretty interesting from the co-founder of Anthropic. And I think what he was mentioning is that he is now seeing AI developing situational awareness, so being aware that it is AI. And it was a big question of, you know, we didn't program it to do this, so what does that mean over time? So I think some guardrails, but ultimately we need the technology and we should be moving forward in that direction to, yeah.
So a lot of optimism and a little asterisk, maybe. Okay, let's start with questions out here, if we can get a microphone. If you could introduce yourself, just say your name, and then dive right into that question.
Hey, Miguel Paredes, thanks so much for the wonderful panel. What are moats you guys are seeing throughout the AI stack as you guys are investing, or are there moats? And if not, what are sources of competitive advantage?
I think there's multiple different modes. I think one that we've been zeroing on has been distribution. I think if you're seeing a company with massive distribution today that is able to build the right AI team, or through acquisition to move fast, or to develop their product roadmap to embed AI products, we think there's longevity in that. And I think two examples from our portfolio company, I think Canva, I was mentioning it a bit earlier. I think 1 out of 10 people in Australia is a user of the platform. That speaks for something. And then we also recently, earlier this year, invested in Ramp, that I think most of you will also be familiar with. And they are rolling out agents to help to automate tasks from the CFO office suite. And then just given their footprint that they have within large companies and SMBs, we think that they have a fair shot at being successful at that use case. So I think the distribution matters, but of course, other moat that I'm sure
I think the same thing applies from the last wave. Distribution, capital can be a moat, talent can be a moat, an incredible moat. Having unique access to data can be an incredible moat. And you see flavors of these in all these companies at the end of the day, right? Like Canva is an amazing example of an incredible distribution. So is ChatGPT now, right? And like these things, they tend to beget each other, and consumers and enterprises, they're sticky, right? Like consumers are really sticky. They don't like to change their behavior. So once you get something, you know, someone to use something again and again and again, 50 times a month, it's hard to get rid of it. And so I think like there's been a lot of talk about moats, but there are all kinds of different moats, and it's not different from the last waves, I don't think, in many ways.
100%.
You agree? Great.
Yeah, 100%. I don't even think that. Yeah.
Nothing. Other questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Deepthi. Thank you so much for being here. How much of the investment are you seeing in actual fundamentally innovative models versus how much of them are wrappers?
In terms of total dollars, I mean, I know of 3 financings that have happened in the last 2 weeks. The seed rounds are 300 million or more. And so just in terms of like aggregate fraction of the, say, the seed or the Series A market, it is like, I would guess 30 to 50% of dollars. So there's a Stanford researcher who came out last week with a paper, raised 300 million in 4 days. The applications themselves are raising significant fractions, but just like on a per company basis, the model innovations are enormous. And that's Okay, so why is this the case? Why are venture capitalists willing to invest 300, 400, even $1 billion on a company with an academic paper? It's because the consumer adoption is so fast that a 10 or 15 point advantage in performance will shift demand. And that market cap could be measured 3, 4, 500 billion, maybe $1 trillion in market cap, which is why Zuckerberg has been so aggressive in acquiring and why everyone is so aggressive here. That's Larry Page was quoted 4 weeks ago saying, "I will go bankrupt losing this battle." So high are the stakes.
I think just maybe to add to that, also, once you see some of these successful use cases in market, I think you've seen most recently the OpenAI round around 500 billion, then someone that is coming up with something that could be disruptive to that, you can easily see how big it can get. So I think that helps a lot as well with fundraising in the early stages from a lot of these companies. The other thing that I think is probably worth highlighting, another space where I've spent a little bit of time is the space industry. And I think initially when you wanted to raise money for a company in that space, not very successful. I think after we've all seen SpaceX, I think the view has changed on the market. And there's also been a lot of SpaceX people that have left and started a new company, and it was a lot easier to secure capital. So I think when we're looking into a lot of the companies that are securing very large round of funding, we're starting to see this OpenAI alumni leaving and then starting new company. And there you go, you have a $2 billion seed round that just happened. But I think that helps.
But you asked where there's a bubble, it's right there.
We have time for one more, I think, right, Mac?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your time here. My name is James, and I'm a PhD student at Harvard, and I work on AI models. I also find AI very scary, and part of me worries that as we're talking here, letting revenue growth drive kind of where we put our focus on AI in the next 5, 10, 15 years may not lead us to the place that we want to. And so my specific focus is, are there ways in which we can help less profitable applications, say interests in public health, work with the economic engines that you guys are helping to drive to help ensure that AI can be used for even more good than it is right now?
Well, okay, so I'm very capitalistic. I will say, because it's in my title, venture capitalist, I think the best way is for all of these companies to succeed massively and then partner. We need to drive this change. I mean, if you just look at what's happening macroeconomically within the U.S. and the debt load and the need for GDP growth, the way that the U.S. society is constructed is you have these incredibly fast-growing businesses that then go and partner, right? Like Google developed Google Health, or you have now Google developing models that are doing drug discovery or particular genomic testing. Like that's where the innovation comes from, but there has to be a capitalist motive behind it. That's the way I see it. Very much a believer of the Hayek school of thought.
Anything else to add to that? It's an interesting place to end. Do you want to add anything at the end here to give it a close?
No,
and thank the
just
panel?
a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, guys.